My name is Amara Sage, and for 17 years I believed I was the master architect of my own happiness. I had designed a life as meticulously as I designed the sustainable breathing buildings that had made my small firm a rising star in the New York architectural scene. It was a life of clean lines, strong foundations, and beautiful, light-filled spaces. At its center, holding up the entire structure, was my husband, Julian Vance. Julian was not a man of clean lines. He was a creature of dazzling, complex orbits. A financial wizard at 39, 2 years my senior, he moved through the world with a gravitational pull that drew people, money, and success to him effortlessly. He had the kind of charisma that could charm a board of stern-faced investors and the corner bodega owner with equal ease. His eyes, the color of aged whiskey, held a perpetual spark of ambition. I had mistaken that spark for passion, for a shared drive to build a remarkable world together. I loved him with a totality that felt like its own form of architecture, a grand sweeping cathedral I had built inside my own heart. We lived in a restored brownstone in Park Slope, its original crown molding, lovingly preserved alongside the smart glass windows I had installed. Our life was a curated collection of beautiful moments Sunday mornings with the New York Times spread across our reclaimed oak table, spontaneous trips to the Hudson Valley when the city felt too constricting, and quiet evenings where his head would rest in my lap as I sketched the soft scratch of my graphite pencil, the only sound in the room. It was by all external measures a perfect life. But beneath the polished hardwood floors and behind the tastefully decorated walls, a fault line was quietly forming, preparing to rupture everything I had built. The tremor that began it all was my brother Leo. At 28, Leo was my opposite and my anchor. Where I was structured, he was spontaneous. Where I saw blueprints, he saw poetry. He was a musician with a heart too big for his chest and a laugh that could fill any room. And he was dying. Aplastic anemia. The diagnosis had landed like a wrecking ball a year ago, a rare aggressive disease where his body had simply stopped producing new blood cells. It was a slow, quiet fading. The vibrant, laughing brother of my youth was being replaced by a pale, tired man who fought for every breath his life tethered to blood transfusions and a cocktail of immunosuppressants. The doctors were clear his only hope, his only chance at a future, was a bone marrow transplant. And so began the search. Our family, which consisted of me, Leo, and our quietly grieving parents in Florida, poured every ounce of our emotional and financial resources into a global hunt for a donor. Julian, to his credit, had been a pillar of public support. He had leveraged his considerable social and corporate network, launching a high-profile Vanguard for Leo campaign through his firm Vance Capital. He spoke at fundraisers, his voice thick with carefully modulated emotion about the importance of family, of fighting for the ones you love. He was the perfect supportive husband, holding my hand as I wept, assuring me that we would find a way. We would move heaven and earth. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon in early October. The sky outside my office window was a brilliant, cloudless blue. I was staring at a 3D model of a new library complex, but my mind was miles away in the sterile white halls of Mount Sinai Hospital, where Leo was undergoing another transfusion. My phone buzzed, displaying the number for the International Bone Marrow Donor Registry. My breath caught in my throat. "Mrs. Vance?" A woman with a gentle, slightly accented voice said. "Dr. Alina Petrova." "Yes," I managed my voice a squeak. "We have news. We found a match for your brother Leo Sage." The words hung in the air, shimmering. A match. Not a partial match, not a potential, but a confirmed, viable, near-perfect 10-10 HLA match. My knees went weak, and I sank into my chair, the sleek leather cool against my trembling legs. Tears streamed down my face, hot and silent. They weren't tears of grief, but of overwhelming, explosive joy. For the first time in a year, the suffocating weight on my chest lifted. The donor Dr. Petrova explained was a young man in a remote mountain village in northern Greece. The logistics would be complex, the costs substantial. There were medical evacuation flights to charter a specialized team to assemble, and the donor's own medical needs and compensation to cover. It was a daunting financial mountain to climb. But here, too, fate had seemingly intervened. Just 2 weeks prior, I had finalized the sale of a design patent. It was for an innovative, carbon-negative, concrete alternative I had spent 3 years developing in my spare time, my secret passion project. The buyer was a major international construction conglomerate, and the sum was transformative. It was my life's greatest professional achievement. Now I knew its true purpose. It wasn't to build skyscrapers, it was to save my brother. Every penny would be a brick in the foundation of his new life. "We'll pay it," I said to Dr. Petrova, my voice ringing with newfound strength. "Whatever it costs, we'll pay it." After the call, I sat in my sun-drenched office and cried until I had no tears left. I called my parents and we wept together over the phone. I called Leo, and his weak but hopeful voice was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. The only person I hadn't told was Julian, and that was by design. Julian's firm, Vance Capital, was hosting its annual Vanguard Gala that Friday. It was the glittering jewel in his corporate crown, a lavish affair held at Cipriani on 42nd Street, celebrating a year of aggressive growth and record profits. It was Julian's night to shine, to be the king of his universe. And I decided in a moment of pure, unadulterated happiness that I would give him a gift worthy of the moment. I wanted to surprise him, to see the pure, unscripted joy on his face when he learned our nightmare was over. The plan was simple, a little theatrical, a little bit us. Julian's executive assistant, a woman named Clara, who guarded him like a Cerberus, was notoriously difficult. Getting anything past her was a challenge, so I decided to bypass her completely. I called the catering manager at Cipriani, a man my firm had worked with on a previous project, and made an unusual request. For just 15 minutes, I wanted to be a member of his waitstaff. He was confused at first, but I spun a charming story about a grand romantic gesture. He eventually agreed, amused by the idea. He would have a simple black uniform and an apron waiting for me. My gift was already prepared, a beautifully framed leather-bound document. It wasn't a stock certificate or a piece of art. It was the non-refundable travel confirmation and flight itinerary for the Greek medical team and the donor. It was a tangible symbol of our miracle, the proof that my love and my work had combined to save the person I loved most in the world after Julian. Friday night arrived, cloaked in the crisp air of a New York autumn. I kissed Julian goodbye at our brownstone, feigning a headache, telling him I'd meet him there later, but might be late. He looked magnificent in a custom Tom Ford tuxedo, his dark hair slicked back, the scent of his expensive cologne sandalwood and bergamot filling the hallway. "Don't push yourself, darling," he said, cupping my face in his hands. His touch was warm, his eyes filled with what I thought was concern. "It's just a party. Your health and Leo's, that's what matters." I watched his town car disappear down the street, my heart swelling. He was a good man, my good man. An hour later, I was slipping through the service entrance of Cipriani. The opulent ballroom was a world away from the clatter and steam of the industrial kitchen. I changed in a small, cramped locker room, pulling on the simple black dress, the starched white apron, the sensible flat shoes. I tied my auburn hair back in a severe bun and scrubbed my face clean of makeup. Looking in the small, cracked mirror, I was anonymous. Amara Sage, the architect, was gone. In her place was a nameless server, part of the invisible machinery that made a night like this run. My heart pounded with a giddy, nervous excitement as I stepped out of the kitchen and into the main hall. The scale of the place was breathtaking. Grand marble columns soared towards an impossibly high vaulted ceiling. The room was bathed in a golden light shimmering off crystal chandeliers and the sequins of designer gowns. The air hummed with the murmur of 1,000 conversations, the clinking of glasses, the soft strains of a jazz quartet. It was a sea of power and wealth, and Julian was its master navigator. I picked up a tray of champagne flutes, the cool, vibrating crystal, a strange anchor in this surreal moment. My hands, usually steady with a drafting pen, trembled slightly. I moved through the glittering crowd, my eyes scanning for him. I saw titans of industry, a famous actress, a city councilman, all people who orbited Julian's son. And then I saw him. He wasn't in the center of the room holding court as I expected. He was off to the side on a secluded stone terrace that overlooked the bustling street below. The area was cordoned off for privacy, but through the manicured hedges, I could see his silhouette against the city lights. He wasn't alone, but he wasn't with a client or a colleague or as a brief, absurd flash of insecurity suggested another woman. He was in a hushed, tense conversation with his own stepmother, Isabella Vance. Isabella was a legend in the financial world, a woman who had inherited the vast Vance family trust not through marriage, but through her own ruthless business acumen after Julian's father had passed away years ago. She was famously cold, a brutalist masterpiece of a woman, all sharp angles and unyielding principles. She and Julian maintained a publicly cordial but privately frosty relationship, each circling the other, wary of their competing ambitions. I edged closer, my waitress disguise the perfect camouflage. I pretended to straighten a row of glasses on a nearby service table, hiding behind a large marble statue of a Roman goddess. I expected to hear them arguing about stock portfolios, about control of the family trust. But the words that drifted over the rustling leaves of the boxwood hedge were not about mergers or acquisitions. They were about me. Julian, this obsession with my portfolio is becoming tiresome. Isabella's voice was like ice chips in a glass, sharp and cold. You've been dancing around this for months. When will you have the liquid capital you need to trigger the buyout clause in your father's trust? You know the terms. I don't deal in promises. I held my breath. This was the legendary power struggle I'd only heard rumors about. Julian wanted to leverage his own firm's success to buy a controlling interest in the larger, more powerful Vance family trust, effectively ousting the woman who held the purse strings. Julian's reply was not the passionate, persuasive tone he used in boardrooms. It was chillingly calm, devoid of all warmth, like a flat line on a heart monitor. Soon, Isabella. Very soon. The clock on the Amara situation is ticking. The Amara situation. My name in his mouth, spoken in that dead clinical tone, felt like a violation. I pressed myself tighter against the cold marble of the statue, the heavy tray of champagne flutes suddenly feeling like a lead weight in my hands. And her brother, Isabella pressed her voice laced with impatience. This is where I expected to hear Julian express some flicker of hope, of frustration at Leo's illness. Perhaps he would say, "We're praying for a miracle," or "The search is ongoing." Instead, what he said stopped the blood in my veins. "The doctors I have on retainer have assured me his condition is terminal. He has less than 6 months. It's a tragedy, of course." The last words were a performance, a cynical flourish that made my stomach churn. He continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Once he's gone, Amara inherits her family's controlling shares in Sage Innovations. Her parents are too grief-stricken to manage it. It all defaults to her. I've already preemptively leveraged our marital assets, our entire shared portfolio, against the projected value of that inheritance. The banks have extended a provisional line of credit. Her grief will make her pliable. She'll sign anything I put in front of her." The world tilted on its axis. The muted sounds of the party, the music, the laughter faded into a distant, roaring hum. Sage Innovations. My father's architectural firm, the one I had taken over and reshaped. My legacy. My family's legacy. Julian wasn't just waiting for my brother to die. He was banking on it. He was building his financial empire on the foundation of my brother's grave. The supportive husband, the Vanguard for Leo campaign, the hand-holding, the comforting words, it was all a lie. A monstrous calculated performance designed to keep me docile and trusting until he could seize my inheritance. I felt a wave of nausea so profound I thought I would be sick, right there on the polished stone floor. My carefully constructed life, my cathedral of love, wasn't just cracked. It was a facade, a Hollywood set with nothing but rotting timber and scaffolding behind it. And then the final unthinkable piece fell into place. Julian's gaze shifted from his stepmother across the manicured terrace lawn. He had spotted someone. I followed his line of sight and my heart stopped. It was Dr. Marlowe, the American head of the International Bone Marrow Donor Registry, the man whose office had coordinated with Dr. Petrova. He was standing near the entrance to the terrace looking nervous. "Excuse me, Isabella," Julian said smoothly, his public persona snapping back into place. "A crucial contact just arrived. We'll continue this later." He strode across the grass, a predator moving with purpose. I watched paralyzed, a helpless spectator at the demolition of my own life. Julian intercepted Dr. Marlowe. He didn't shake his hand. There was no pleasantry. In a single fluid motion, Julian's hand went to the inside pocket of his tuxedo jacket and withdrew a thick white envelope. It was a subtle, almost imperceptible exchange, a ghost of a movement, but I saw it. I saw the envelope pass from my husband's hand to the doctor's. Julian leaned in close, his smile a grotesque parody of charm. His voice was low, but in the sudden ringing silence of my perception, the words carried to me as if he had shouted them through a bullhorn. "Make sure the complications with the European donor are permanent. A last-minute infection, a travel document, issue a sudden change of heart. I don't care what it is. We can't have any last-minute miracles interfering with the timeline." The tray slipped from my numb fingers. The sound of 24 champagne flutes shattering on the stone floor was deafening. It was a crash, a splintering, a violent explosion of glass and liquid that echoed the complete and utter destruction of my world. For a split second, every head on the terrace turned towards the sound. I saw Julian's eyes, wide with alarm, lock onto mine. In that instant, he saw me. Not Amara Sage, his loving wife. He saw the waitress. He saw the witness. A flicker of pure animal panic crossed his face before it was replaced by a mask of cold fury. But I was already gone. I turned and fled, stumbling through the glittering crowd, a ghost in a black uniform. I didn't see the shocked faces or hear the murmurs of the guests I bumped past. My mind was a white-hot storm of betrayal, the hope for Leo. It wasn't real. The donor from the Greek village wasn't a miracle. He was a tool. A pawn in Julian's sick, elaborate game designed to give me just enough hope to remain calm, to believe in a future that Julian was actively working to prevent. He hadn't just been unsupportive. He hadn't just been passively waiting. He'd been methodically, criminally sabotaging my brother's only chance at life. He was murdering Leo as surely as if he were holding a pillow over his face, all for money, for an inheritance, for power. I burst out of the service entrance and into the cold night air, gulping it down like a drowning woman. I leaned against the brick wall of the building, my body shaking with a violence that felt tectonic. The framed gift, the symbol of our miracle, was still in my locker. I imagined smashing it, grinding the glass and the lies into dust with my heel. I didn't. I hailed a cab, my movements robotic. The drive back to our beautiful brownstone in Park Slope was a journey through a foreign country. The house I had loved, every design choice, every piece of furniture I had carefully selected, now seemed tainted, haunted. It wasn't a home. It was a stage for a very long con. I walked in and went straight to the bar. I poured a glass of whiskey, Julian's favorite, a 25-year-old Macallan, and downed it in one fiery gulp. The burn in my throat was a dull echo of the inferno in my soul. I stood in the center of our perfect living room and saw it all with new eyes. The photograph on the mantel of our wedding day, his smile a liar's masterpiece. The expensive art on the walls bought with money he was already counting from my future grief. The whole curated, beautiful, fraudulent life. An hour later, I heard his key in the door. My heart didn't leap with love. It turned to a small, cold stone in my chest. I had a choice. I could confront him, scream rage, and unleash the hurricane inside me. He would deny it. He would lie. He would twist it, gaslight me, call me hysterical, tell me I'd misunderstood. He was a master of manipulation, and in my current state, I was vulnerable. A screaming match would accomplish nothing but his own cautious retreat. It would warn him. So I made a different choice. As his footsteps approached, I forced the tears to come. They weren't difficult to summon. They were born of a genuine, bottomless agony. but I repurposed them. I weaponized my own heartbreak. He found me crumpled on the sofa, sobbing. "Amara, darling, what is it I was so worried when you disappeared?" His voice was a perfect symphony of concern. I looked up at him, my face a mask of manufactured devastation. "The donor." I choked out the words, tasting like ash in my mouth. It was Dr. Marlowe. He was at the party. I asked him for an update. I let out a gut-wrenching sob. "Julian." He fell through. There was an unforeseen medical issue, some kind of infection. He's no longer a viable match. It's over. The hope we had, it's gone. He knelt before me, his face a study in practiced sorrow. He pulled me into his arms, holding me tight against his chest. I could feel the steady, calm beat of his heart, the heart of a monster. I rested my head on the shoulder of my brother's would-be murderer and wept, my body limp in his sickening, triumphant embrace. He held me for a long time, murmuring soothing lies into my hair. "I'm so sorry, my love. We'll get through this. I'm here. I'm right here." "Oh, I know you are, Julian." I thought a strange, terrifying calm beginning to settle over me. "You're right here, and you have no idea what you've just unleashed." In that moment, as I played the part of the broken-hearted wife, the architect in me died. The woman who built things with light and glass and hope was gone. And in her place, a demolitions expert was born. My new project was clear. I would not just build a new life for myself. First, I would be required to level the old one to its very foundations. And that foundation was Julian Vance. The days that followed were a masterclass in performance art. I played the grieving wife with an authenticity that deserved an Oscar. I was fragile, quiet, and clung to Julian as if he were my only lifeline. I allowed him to manage things, to field calls from my distraught parents, to send consoling emails to friends, to be the strong, stoic husband bearing the weight of our family's tragedy. Each feigned look of sympathy from him, each comforting touch was a hot poker against my skin, but I bore it. My grief was my camouflage. My pain was my shield. It made me invisible, underestimated. It was the last thing he would ever see as a threat. At night, I would lie beside him in our bed, the warmth of his body a repulsive heat. While he slept, the sound dreamless sleep of the sociopath, I would stare into the darkness, my mind a whirring engine of cold calculation. The architect was dead, but her skills remained. I began to draft a new kind of blueprint, not for a building, but for a demolition. I listed his assets, his liabilities, his pressure points, his vanities. My grief did not make me pliable. It tempered me, hardened me into something sharp and unbreakable. I knew I couldn't do this alone. Julian was a formidable opponent deeply entrenched in the city's financial and legal networks. A direct assault would be suicide. I needed leverage. I needed power, and I needed resources far beyond my own. My mind kept replaying the scene on the terrace. Julian hadn't just been betraying me. He had been playing a longer, more ambitious game against his stepmother. He was using my tragedy to oust her. He thought we were two separate problems to be managed. He never imagined we might become a unified solution to him. Isabella Vance. The idea of approaching her was terrifying. She was a woman who ate men like Julian for breakfast. She was famously unsentimental, a creature of pure, dispassionate logic. She would not be moved by my tears or my story of heartbreak, but she might be moved by a threat to her own empire. She might be moved by a well-reasoned, mutually beneficial business proposal. And my proposal was simple. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. A week after the gala, I made the call. I didn't go through her phalanx of assistants. I found her private office number through a contact my father had from an old city planning commission. I left a message, my voice steady and professional. "Isabella, this is Amara Vance. I have information regarding Julian's attempt to trigger the buyout clause of the Vance Trust. It is a matter of extreme urgency and mutual interest. I believe we should meet." The callback came in less than an hour. "My office. Tomorrow. 10 a.m." was all she said before the line went dead. Her office was on the 80th floor of a skyscraper in the financial district, a stark minimalist expanse of glass steel and white marble that seemed to hang in the clouds. It was less an office and more a statement of absolute, unapologetic power. There were no family photos, no sentimental trinkets. The only art was a massive, chaotic Jackson Pollock painting that seemed to vibrate with contained energy. Isabella sat behind a desk that was a single massive slab of polished granite. She was even more imposing in person, dressed in a severe dark gray suit, her silver hair cut in a sharp geometric bob. Her eyes, a pale piercing blue, scrutinized me as I sat down. She did not offer coffee or pleasantries. "You have 5 minutes," she said, her voice as hard as the desk between us. I didn't waste a second. I didn't cry. I didn't plead. I laid it out like a legal brief, my voice even and devoid of emotion. "On the night of the Vanguard Gala," I began, "I overheard your conversation with Julian on the terrace. I also witnessed him pass an envelope to Dr. Marlowe of the International Donor Registry." Her expression didn't change, but I saw a flicker of interest in her eyes. "Julian is not just waiting for my brother to die to inherit my family's company," I continued. "He's actively ensuring it. He has bribed a key official in the donor network to sabotage any potential match. He has constructed an elaborate lie, a false hope to keep me and my family docile while he waits for Leo's inevitable death." I slid a thin file across the granite desk. "This is Dr. Marlowe's home address, his personal financial details, and the times and locations of 3 other meetings he has had with Julian in the past 6 months, which I obtained through a private investigator I hired 2 days ago." She opened the file, her eyes scanning the pages with unnerving speed. "Julian's plan," I went on, my voice dropping, "is to use the controlling shares of Sage Innovations, which he will acquire through me, his grieving, manipulated wife, as the collateral to force you out of the Vance Trust. He's using my family's tragedy as the weapon against me, and he's using the proceeds of that tragedy as the weapon against you. He believes we are 2 women to be managed, a sentimental wife and a difficult stepmother. He has profoundly underestimated us both." I leaned forward, my hands clasped on the table. "We have a common enemy, Isabella, a common threat. He is a cancer in both our lives, and the only way to deal with cancer is to cut it out. Completely." She closed the file and stared at me for a long, silent minute. The quiet in the room was immense, broken only by the faint whisper of the wind against the windows 80 stories up. I could feel her weighing me, assessing my words, my motives, my resolve. She was looking for weakness for the hysterical wife. She found none. She found an architect with a blueprint for destruction. Finally, she spoke, her voice like steel. "What is it you want from me?" "2 things," I said without hesitation. "First, help me save my brother. You have resources and global connections that I can only dream of. Bypassing the corrupted official registry, finding a real donor, and arranging the logistics covertly, that is a race against time that I cannot win alone. Leo's health is failing. We don't have much time. And the second, help me bury your stepson." I said the words cold and clear. "You provide the financial firepower and the corporate cover. I will provide the inside knowledge. I know Julian's finances, his habits, his vanities. More importantly, I know my own company, Sage Innovations. I know its strengths, its weaknesses, and its hidden vulnerabilities. Julian thinks it's a prize to be won. I will turn it into a trap that will swallow him whole." A slow, chilling smile spread across Isabella's face. It was not a smile of warmth, but of appreciation, of recognition. It was the smile of a predator who has just found a worthy hunting partner. "An elegant proposal, Amara," she said, her tone shifting from skeptical to collaborative. "He always was an arrogant, greedy boy. My husband, his father, spoiled him rotten." She stood up and walked to the vast window looking down at the city below. "Very well. A pact is formed. You help me protect my legacy from that parasite, and I will help you save your brother." She turned back to me, her blue eyes glinting. "And then we will dismantle Julian Vance piece by piece." And so began our 2-front war. Phase 1 was a desperate high-stakes race against the clock to save Leo. Isabella was ruthlessly efficient. Within hours, she had assembled a covert team of private medical consultants and investigators completely independent of the official registry. They operated with the speed and secrecy of an intelligence agency. The search was grueling. We chased down leads in Germany and South Korea and Argentina. There were false starts and dead ends that shattered my hope, only for Isabella's calm, determined voice on the phone to pull me back from the edge. "Patience, Amara," she would say. "Emotion is a liability. We focus on the objective." Meanwhile, I maintained my charade at home. I would spend my days in tense encrypted video calls with Isabella's team, tracking potential donors, and my evenings playing the part of the listless, broken wife for Julian. He was growing more confident, more expansive, convinced his plan was rolling along perfectly. He talked about a hypothetical corporate expansion, testing the waters, seeing how I'd react. I'd just nod numbly, my apparent apathy fueling his arrogance. 3 agonizing months into our search, we found him, a confirmed 10-to-10 match. Not in a remote Greek village, but a young university student in Sao Paulo, Brazil. Isabella's machine kicked into high gear. Within a week, using a combination of private jets, discreetly donated funds to a Brazilian hospital, and a cover story of a corporate executive needing emergency medical transport, we had the donor and his family on a plane to New York. The entire operation was a masterpiece of logistics and subterfuge. Leo was admitted to a private wing at the Cleveland Clinic far from New York, and Dr. Marlowe's influence under an assumed name. The transplant was a success. The first battle was won. While Leo began the long, slow road to recovery, we launched Phase 2, the corporate takedown. This was my domain. The weapon was my own company, Sage Innovations. Julian's strategy, as I had explained to Isabella, was simple and brutal. He was using a shell corporation, Aurelius Acquisitions, to secretly buy up Sage Innovations' corporate debt from various lenders. His plan was to wait for Leo's death, seize my inheritance, and then as the new majority shareholder call in the debt he secretly owned, triggering a default and forcing a hostile takeover that would wipe out any minority shareholders and deliver the company to him clean and clear. Our strategy was to beat him at his own game. Isabella, with her limitless capital, created our own anonymous shell entity. I chose the name Phoenix Holdings. It was perfect. A new entity rising from the ashes of my old life. The game began. Phoenix Holdings entered the market aggressively, outbidding Aurelius Acquisitions for every parcel of Sage Innovations debt that became available. Julian was baffled. Who was this mysterious, hyper-aggressive rival? He couldn't possibly know it was his mousy, grieving wife and his frosty stepmother. He was forced to react, to divert more capital, to liquidate other assets to keep up. He was like a poker player, convinced he had a royal flush, raising the stakes again and again, blind to the fact that we held the only hand that mattered. But we didn't stop there. Phoenix Holdings didn't just buy my company's debt. We started buying the debt of his firm, Vance Capital. Julian had over-leveraged his own company to fund his secret war. He had exposed himself, making his own firm vulnerable. We quietly bought his liabilities from nervous creditors who were more than happy to offload the risk. The pressure began to mount on him. I watched the transformation happen up close. The confident, charming man was replaced by an erratic, paranoid stranger. He was constantly on his phone, his conversations sharp and angry. He started drinking heavily. He lost weight. He would stare at me across the dinner table with a strange, calculating look in his eyes, as if trying to see if I knew something. I would just offer him a sad, tired smile, the perfect picture of a wife lost in her own sorrow. I was a ghost in our house, and he never once suspected the ghost was the one pulling the strings of his ruin. He was so consumed by his mysterious corporate enemy that he never thought to look at the woman sleeping next to him. The final piece of our trap was architectural in its precision. I, as the CEO of Sage Innovations, announced a major ambitious new project, a massive self-sustaining urban village in Queens. The project was celebrated in the press, but it was designed to require a huge immediate infusion of capital, making the company's debt structure appear even more precarious. It was the perfect bait. Julian, believing I was running the company into the ground out of incompetence and grief, saw it as his final opportunity. He believed if he could just secure one last round of funding, he could buy the last crucial piece of debt and take over before the whole thing imploded. He took the bait. He called an emergency investors summit, pooling all his remaining credibility to secure the final funds he needed to close his trap. He didn't know that, as he was planning his summit, our trap was already closing on him. 6 months after that fateful night at the Cipriani, Julian stood on another stage. This time, it wasn't a celebration of success. It was a desperate plea for survival. He had booked the grand auditorium at the New York Public Library's Stephen A. Schwarzman building, a place of gravitas and history, hoping its hallowed halls would lend his flailing company an air of stability. He called it an emergency investors summit. The room was filled with anxious-looking men and women in expensive suits, the last of his loyal investors, the ones he was about to con one final time. I watched from the shadows at the back of the auditorium. At home, I had told Julian I was too unwell to attend, that the stress was too much. He had readily agreed, patting my hand with condescending pity. "Of course, darling, you just rest. I'll handle this." He was on stage now under a harsh spotlight, his face pale and slick with sweat despite the air conditioning. He had lost the easy charisma, the relaxed confidence. He was a cornered animal running on pure adrenaline and hubris. He was delivering a passionate, breathless speech about a new era of growth for Vance Capital, an era to be fueled by a visionary acquisition that was just on the horizon. He was talking about my company. He was talking about the spoils he expected from my brother's death. As he reached the crescendo of his speech, his voice ringing with false conviction, the grand double doors at the back of the auditorium swung open. I walked in. I was not the grieving ghost from our brownstone. I was not the anonymous waitress in a black uniform. I was wearing a dress the color of blood and fire, a stunning floor-length gown of scarlet silk that clung to my body like a second skin. My hair, free from its severe bun, fell in soft auburn waves over my shoulders. My makeup was flawless, my eyes lined in sharp dark kohl. I walked with a slow, deliberate pace down the central aisle, the soft click of my heels the only sound that mattered. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Heads turned. Conversations faltered. On stage, Julian's voice caught in his throat. He stopped mid-sentence, his eyes locking on mine. He stared, his mouth slightly agape, a look of pure, unadulterated confusion on his face. He was seeing a woman he didn't recognize. I didn't smile. I just held his gaze as I continued my slow, inexorable advance towards the stage. As I reached the front row, the massive screen behind Julian, which had been displaying the Vance Capital logo, suddenly flickered. The logo dissolved, replaced by a live video feed. It was a clean, bright hospital room. And sitting up in the bed, looking thin but vibrant, was my brother Leo. He was smiling. A genuine room-filling smile that I hadn't seen in over a year. He raised a glass of water, his hand steady. "Couldn't make it to the summit, Julian," Leo said, his voice clear and strong, amplified by the auditorium speakers. "Things have been a little busy, but I just wanted to raise a glass. To family." The room erupted in a cacophony of confused murmurs. Julian looked from my face to the screen and back again, his own face turning the color of ash. The carefully constructed reality he had built for himself was short-circuiting in real time. Then from the wings of the stage, a second figure emerged. It was Isabella Vance, looking regal and formidable in a tailored white suit. She walked with an unhurried grace to the center of the stage and calmly took the microphone from her stepson's limp, unresisting hand. Julian just stood there, paralyzed, a puppet, with its strings suddenly cut. Isabella surveyed the shocked faces of the investors. Her voice, amplified, was as crisp and cold as a winter morning. "Good afternoon. For those of you who don't know me, I am Isabella Vance. My stepson Julian promised you all a new era of growth for his company." She paused, letting the words hang in the air. "He promised you a visionary acquisition. What he failed to mention is that this new era was to be funded by the death of that young man you just saw on the screen. It was to be an era built on bribery, conspiracy, and fraud. The screen behind her flickered again. Leo's smiling face was replaced by a series of documents, bank statements showing wire transfers from Aurelius Acquisitions to a private offshore account belonging to Dr. Alan Marlowe, scanned copies of emails obtained by Isabella's investigators between Julian and Marlowe, discussing the unfortunate complications with the donor search. Finally, a video began to play. It was a recorded deposition from a terrified-looking Dr. Marlowe, who had been confronted with incontrovertible evidence and had chosen cooperation over a long prison sentence. He detailed in his own trembling voice the entire scheme, the bribe, the deliberate sabotage, the cold-blooded plan to let Leo Sage die. The auditorium was utterly silent now, the kind of silence that follows a massive explosion. The investors stared their faces a mixture of horror and dawning financial panic. Isabella let the silence stretch, a conductor savoring a dramatic rest. Then she delivered the final blow. For the past 6 months, she announced, her voice ringing with authority, many of you have been approached by an entity called Phoenix Holdings, which has been aggressively acquiring corporate debt, both from Sage Innovations and from Vance Capital itself. She looked directly at Julian, whose entire body was now trembling. Julian has spent his every last dollar fighting this mysterious rival. What he never understood is that Phoenix Holdings is my company, and as of 9 a.m. this morning, she declared, her voice booming through the hall, I have formally called in all of Mr. Vance's outstanding debts. His lines of credit are frozen. His assets are seized. Vance Capital is insolvent. He is ruined. She turned and looked at me, a silent invitation. I walked up the small set of stairs and onto the stage, the scarlet of my dress a stark slash against the white of her suit. We stood side by side, two queens on a captured board. I took the microphone from her. I didn't look at the crowd. I looked only at the broken, hollowed-out shell of the man I had once loved. I didn't shout. I didn't scream. My voice was calm, clear, and carried through the cavernous, silent room. You built your future on my family's grave, Julian. I said, each word a carefully placed stone. You leveraged my love and bet against my brother's life. But you made one mistake, one fatal design flaw in your grand plan. I let the silence hang for a beat, letting him feel the weight of it. You forgot I'm an architect. I know how to read a blueprint. And yours was rotten to the core. As if on cue, the double doors at the back of the auditorium opened again. This time it wasn't me. It was two uniformed officers of the NYPD, their movements calm and purposeful as they began their own slow walk down the aisle. Their destination was the stage. Julian Vance finally broke. A strangled animal sound escaped his lips, and he collapsed into the chair behind him, his head in his hands. A man utterly, completely, and publicly defeated. The demolition was complete. The fallout was a media firestorm. The story had everything a high society villain, a miraculous medical recovery, a tale of corporate espionage, and the delicious, brutal spectacle of a powerful man's public immolation. Vance Capital in ruins, screamed the headline of the Wall Street Journal. Architect of deceit, blared the cover of New York Magazine, featuring a split image of Julian's handsome, smiling face from a year ago next to his haggard, defeated mugshot. His arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, wire fraud, and bribery was the lead story on every news channel for a week. The investors he'd duped scrambled to distance themselves, their panic and outrage a fitting epilogue to their greed. I watched it all from a distance, feeling not triumph, but a quiet, profound sense of release. The rage had burned itself out, leaving behind a clean, empty space. There was no joy in his destruction, only a grim necessity. The demolition phase was over. It was time to start building again. Isabella was true to her word. With Julian's empire in ashes, there was a power vacuum, and we filled it. We didn't just let Sage Innovations stand alone. In a move that shocked the business world, we announced a merger. A new powerhouse entity was formed, Sage Vance Group. It combined the innovative design and sustainable technology of my firm with the immense capital and global reach of Isabella's. I was no longer just Amara Sage, the architect. I was named the co-CEO, standing on equal footing with the most formidable woman I had ever met. We were not just allies anymore. We were partners. My first official act as CEO was not to acquire a rival or launch a new development. It was to take the original funds from my patent sale, the money I had once intended to use for a single fraudulent donor, and put it to its true purpose. I established the Leo Sage Foundation, a nonprofit organization with a singular, ambitious mission to completely overhaul the bone marrow donation process for families in need. We would fund the searches, simplify the logistics, cover the costs, and provide the kind of support that I had so desperately needed. We would take the weapon Julian had tried to use against us and turn it into a shield for countless others. The following year passed in a blur of focused, meaningful work. I threw myself into building our new company and our new foundation with the same intensity I had once reserved for my blueprints. I designed workflows and corporate structures with the same care I gave to light and space. I discovered a new kind of creativity, not in sketching buildings, but in constructing opportunities, in building a legacy that had nothing to do with steel and glass and everything to do with hope and resilience. The final scene of my old life's demolition and my new life's construction took place 1 year after the Investors Summit on a bright, sunny afternoon in Queens. I stood on a different kind of stage, this one outdoors, set against the backdrop of a gleaming new building. It wasn't an office tower or a luxury condo. It was the first Leo Sage-centered, a state-of-the-art mobile donation and testing facility, a building I had designed myself. It was sleek, efficient, and welcoming, the physical embodiment of our foundation's mission. I looked out at the crowd gathered for the dedication ceremony. It was a sea of hopeful faces, nurses, doctors, community leaders, and families who had been touched by the same kind of struggle we had endured. And in the front row, my breath caught in my chest. There sat Leo, his face full and healthy, his eyes bright with life. He was fully recovered, his laughter once again the loudest in any room. Next to him sat Isabella, not in a severe power suit, but in a soft, elegant cashmere sweater, a genuine warm smile on her face. They were not my husband's stepmother and my sick brother. They were my family, my real partners, my foundation. As I stepped up to the podium, I thought about the woman I was a year and a half ago, the woman who had naively planned to surprise her husband with a gift her heart full of love and excitement. In the end, the greatest surprise was not the one I had planned, but the one that was thrust upon me. The surprise was discovering the woman I was forced to become, not a victim of betrayal, but the architect of her own justice. I had learned that the strongest structures are not built of concrete and steel, but of resilience, of integrity, and of the unwavering courage to protect what and who you love. I looked out at the crowd, at Leo, at Isabella, at the beautiful building behind me that stood as a testament to our shared future. The light was bright, the air was clear, and for the first time in a very long time, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace. I was not defined by the man who had wronged me or by the life he had shattered. I was defined by what I had built from the rubble. I was powerful, I was at peace, and I was finally, breathtakingly free. Amara's story is a powerful reminder that we all have a hidden strength we can unlock in our darkest moments. If her journey moved you, please show your support by hitting the like button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to the channel for more unforgettable stories of strength and survival. What did you think of Amara's revenge? Let us know in the comments below.